I read an article about a preacher who was counseling with someone, and the person he was counseling said this: "I guess I have been praying to a God I thought I knew. The more he reveals himself like you're describing, I guess I need to figure out whether I can trust God for who he really is." And then the preacher made this comment: "Unless we know who God is as he revealed himself to us and not who he is in our best estimation, we cannot rightly worship God. We cannot rightly praise God. We cannot confess or testify accurately of God, and we cannot confidently pray to God in times of pain and adversity." Well, we've been asking this question with this series that we're doing, this 4-part series, of why is it so hard to live for God? And again, it's not, don't think of this so much as a Christian versus non-Christian thing. Why won't they accept Christ? I'm talking about believers, people who have made a commitment to live for God. Why is it so hard then to live out that commitment entirely, faithfully, completely? I'm not saying we'll ever be perfect, but why are we so often tempted to live for ourselves versus God? To not follow his principles, to not trust in him, not do the things he says, avoid the things he says not to do. Why should it be difficult at all? And I think the key is what this person pointed out. We don't understand God clearly. We've got some distorted image. We know there's a God, we know he sent his son, but something's missing. What we need to know clearly are his control and his love, especially for times of difficulty, but really anything, because I can handle the easy things. I can handle easy obedience. I can handle easy temptation of, don't do that. And I can handle easy faith, although I don't know if there is such a thing. It's not really faith if it's easy, if I see how it can come through. But I can handle those. What I need is when I don't see how it could work out in the way that seems best to me, do I trust God is in control? That he is aware of everything that's going on. He has the wisdom to know what's best and the best way to bring it about, and the power then to do that. He's in control, and he always loves me. He wants what's best for me. He uses his control in the way that's best for me. If I could just get that, I could face any situation that I encounter, and I could trust God. I could follow him. I could obey God, whatever that is. And so that's what we've been trying to do. That's what Paul was doing to the people of Ephesus. That's why we looked at. To look at these lenses, what I'm calling the lenses for looking at life, well, we looked at the two lenses of God's control and his love from those passages in Ephesians where Paul says to these believers, you've been forgiven, you're going to heaven. Oh, all that time in between, you need to grow. Here's a key to doing it. Experience God's control. Experience his love. That will help us so much. And so we've looked at those, and then last week we looked through those lenses. All right, I understand his control and his love. Let's look through those. And we said, look at living in general. And we talked about Abraham and God calling him to sacrifice Isaac. And we said the issue there, the test, the thing that Abraham was really being tested about was his faith, but specifically, Abraham, will you trust me and me alone, God was saying, versus trust God and something else. Trust God and whatever it is I can see, that from that physical point of view, from this earthly temporary wisdom, seems like I need that too, just to make sure I can get by in this situation. And we're all tempted to do that, to have a God and. But we found out that when we do that, we're really trusting in the and, because so many times our sense of peace and lack of worry or worry, they fluctuate. Well, God never fluctuates, so I'm really just trusting in the and. Well, today we're going to looking at loving. And I realize loving is really a subset of living, but it's a pretty important one. So we're going to spend a whole sermon on this, because Jesus said in John chapter 13, by this all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. This is a key trait. And so we're going to look at John chapter 13, mainly verses 1 through 5. I'm going to read those from the English Standard Version, and then we'll begin to break them down. It says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of the world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments and, taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now, maybe you've heard me talk before about wait a minute moments. You're reading through a text and your response is something like that. Wait a minute. It raises a question, maybe about how something happened or why something happened or how does this fit with something else. Well, to me, this whole story is a wait a minute moment when you think about this is the Son of God, the Creator himself of the universe, washing feet. That right there is a wait a minute moment. But even more of a wait a minute moment than the fact that Jesus did it is how did he do it? Now, I've said more important than WWJD is HDJD, it. How did Jesus do it? The things that he did. And if our answer to that is, well, he was Jesus, then we might as well tear this page out of our Bible. I don't know how you get rid of it off a tablet. Anytime we see Jesus do something and we say, oh, he was Jesus, that means it means nothing for me. It's maybe a historical fact, but it does nothing to help me live my life as a believer. If Jesus did the things he did, other than the miracles, if he lived in obedience to Christ, to God the Father, if he trusted him simply because he was God in human flesh, that doesn't help me at all. But the Bible says that's not the case, that Jesus was tempted in all ways just as we are. And that doesn't mean he faced the same temptations, just that. It means he faced them the same way. It wasn't the fact that he was God in the flesh, that he was somehow immune, unable to sin. No. He faced that temptation the way I do. There was a chance to sin, but he didn't each time. How did he do it? And this here, how did he bring himself to wash the disciples' feet? I want to know how he did that. Because if I can learn how he did that, just think how that's going to impact me as we talk about how this was a display of love here. You know, this how, if I could learn this, it would literally change my life. The way that I live, the way I see life, the way I interact with people, it would change my relationships if I can get this. It would change a church. If a church full of people can get what Jesus did here, that church will be a different place. It'll be a church that stands out, and literally then as more and more of that happens, it can change the world. Well, what is it about what Jesus did and how he did it? Let's look again. Verse 1 says, now before the feast of the Passover. The Jews had three main feasts, and this was probably the mainest. The feast of the Passover celebrated when God sent the death angel to pass over the land of Egypt. And you remember the Israelites put blood on the doorpost and their firstborn were spared. The Egyptians were killed. And that's when Pharaoh finally said, okay, go. And this was God's deliverance, as he brought them out and made them into a nation. And so this was the main feast that they remembered. It says, now before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, he knew his time on earth was coming to an end. He was going to depart and go back to the Father. But we know how he was going to do that. He wasn't taking a bus. He wasn't flying first class. There was no Uber chariot. Jesus was going back to the Father. How? By dying on the cross. That's what he knew was coming. And he knew it was the hour. Now, it was close. He wouldn't sleep again until all this took place. You know, sometimes when there's something that you're sort of dreading and it's in the distance, you're like, that might be some of you filling out your taxes. I hate filling out taxes. But right now it's sort of in the distance. About April 10th, 11th, 12th, now it's the hour. The hour has come. And it just becomes more real, doesn't it? Well, Jesus, his whole life, he knew something. Well, now it's there. This was it. The hour had come. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And I don't think that's talking about just the end chronological. It's coming to the last minute, last hour of this. It's to the end. The full extent is what the NIV said. He showed them the full extent of his love. In what way? It doesn't It doesn't say specifically, he did this because it was an act of love, but he's going to wash their feet. And you think about that, in what way was that love? Well, that's what they needed at that time. Love is meeting the need that a person has. Love is seeing what need is it that you have and how can I meet it no matter what it costs me. And Jesus was willing to do that. He showed them the full extent of his love. He loved them to the very end of what love looks like and means. Verse 2, during supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Why John put that there? He didn't need that detail. I mean, John was the last gospel written, so people already knew it was going to happen. He's about to show what happens when Judas gets up and leaves. Jesus says, one of you betray me. Judas gets up and leaves. Why does he put that detail there? He could have just went into verse 4 there. Jesus rose from supper. Well, he's giving the setting. As Jesus gets ready to do this, this is what was taking place, and Jesus knew it. And it's not even just that. It says in verse 1, having loved his own who were in the world. He's talking there about the disciples. Well, it says they were in the world. Well, where else are they going to be? On a different planet? In another dimension? Now, in the world is not saying, they resided here on earth. It's in the world in the sense of the world as opposed to God, how the Bible uses that. And it doesn't mean they were opposed to God, but it meant they were still in a very real way, a part of the world. Just prior to this, especially in Luke's gospel, the way he arranges things, they were arguing over who's the greatest. Think of how different that is from Jesus' mindset, how contrary to his mindset. Jesus knows, and he's going to tell them soon, you're all going to flee when this takes place, when I'm arrested. When Peter objects, you remember, you're going to betray me. He knows that. He also knows, Peter's going to deny him, he knows Judas is about to betray him. So as Jesus gets ready to do this, he's not thinking, wow, what a stellar group of guys. If anyone deserves their feet to be washed, it's these guys. No. John's given the setting. Here's what was going on. As Jesus, in verse 4, rose from supper, he laid aside his outer garments and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. He not only did the act, he looked the part. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with a towel that was wrapped around him. Have you ever had your feet washed? Not have you ever washed your feet. I'm hoping the answer to that is yes. Have you ever had your feet washed by someone? My uncle used to go to a church where they would have foot washings occasionally on Sunday nights. And I remember him telling me, people's feet were never cleaner than the night of a foot washing. And wouldn't that be the case? If you knew there was going to be a foot washing, that you were going to be taking off your shoes and someone else was going to wash your feet, what would you do? Unless you're a teenage guy and you thought, boy, it'd be fun. I'm going to wear my worst old ratty sneakers and someone's going to hate getting me. The rest of us, we would wash our feet right before we leave for church. We'd wash our feet. We would have had the socks laid out. We'd had powder in the shoes. We might not even wear the shoes. On the drive to church, we'd have the air conditioner blowing on our feet right before we came in. We would want our feet to be as clean as possible. That's not what the case was with the disciples. I remember seeing a movie about Jesus, and doing this, and he poured a little water over their feet, and maybe you saw a little thin layer of dust. I don't even think you saw that come off their feet. They were already clean. That's not the way it was. These people, they walked through dusty streets. They didn't walk on the sidewalk. They didn't have sidewalks. They walked through dusty streets. The same streets that animals walk through and left behind when animals leave. And they walked in those streets with sandals on. Not closed up tennis shoes, anything like that, sandals. You know what their feet were like. And you know why this was a need? Because they would eat, you remember. It'd be bad enough if it was today, putting your feet under the table, you'd still feel, ugh. But they would recline, and so their feet would be out to the side, and their feet needed washed. And this was usually the job of the lowest servant in the household. No one wanted to do this. That's what was happening there. That's what their need was, and it was a true need. And so when it says he loved them to the end, to the full extent, again, the point is whatever love calls for, That's what it is. That's what we need to do. Whatever a person truly needs, that's what it means to love them. That's what Jesus is pointing out here. Well, I think we know that, right? This isn't one of those sermons, well, wow, I've never heard of this. I've never heard of Jesus washing feet. I've never heard I need to love other people. This one's pretty basic, right? But I think the problem here is not that we make a genuine attempt and fall short. Because there's times in our life, that's really the Christian life. If we make any genuine attempt, I'm still going to fall short. I'm imperfect. The problem is not that. The problem is, I think, before we even start, we start the idea of loving with like some limits. Here's the extent of my love, and it's not to the end. It's not the fullest extent. We put some limits on it because we make some excuses. And here's some of the ones that I've heard. Why don't we rationalize the limit from the outset by saying the person is hard to love? I know I'm supposed to love people, but that person is so hard to love. Well, surprise, surprise, loving means loving people. And people are hard to love. In some languages, are you familiar? You don't even use the word love of anything other than people. Like in German, I studied that in high school, don't remember much, but I remember you don't say, I love chocolate or I love pizza. Can't imagine not saying I don't love chocolate, but I love chocolate. But I see where they're coming from. Like, don't put chocolate on the same level as a person. But at the same time, you got to realize when I say I love a person, okay, it's reserved for a person, but people are sometimes hard to love. People have issues. I remember friends and I joking, ministry wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the people. Like, well, ministry is to people. Loving is people. And so it doesn't matter, but we sometimes, no, not that person, or no, not when they're doing that. That's just beyond the limit of what God should expect of me to love. And so how does this passage help overcome that excuse? His name's Judas. And that verse that reminds us right in the middle, as Jesus got ready to wash these feet, he washed all their feet. They all had issues where he could have said, you worthy of my love? But especially Judas. You would think it could say easily, he washed, 11 out of 12 feet. No. And even Judas didn't get up to leave before this. The way things worked out, Jesus didn't make his announcement before this. Judas was there and Jesus washed his feet. Who is there that you can say, no, I just can't love that person? Who's done to you worse than Judas has done to Jesus? Has anyone ever betrayed you unto death? If so, apparently they didn't do a very good job because you're here, Maybe you escaped, good for you. Congratulations. I've never had anything that severe. Someone betrayed me unto death. Who can I look at and say, no, I just can't love you? I can't love you when you're doing that. Jesus loved Judas before, but now that he's done this, oh, come on. No. You can't exclude anyone. I don't care what they've done. Well, the second excuse we sometimes give is that the act, whatever they need at the moment, whatever it would require me, that's just too much. I'm willing to love, but come on, Jesus, there's limits. There's some things that, that takes too much time, that takes too much effort, it goes too far. Whatever it is, okay, let's look at this passage. How does it help us? Verse 1 says, in light of he knew that his hour had come, he loved them to the end. Well, realize that this passage here, it's initiating things all the way up to the cross. So when it talks about Jesus' love, what love that he's going to show them, it's beginning here with his washing the feet, but it's going then all the way to the cross. And as I thought about that, what it does is it shows that the two different sides of love. On the one hand, love is sacrificial, but on the other hand, love is also humble. And I think sometimes we're more comfortable with one than the other. And maybe there's some people who are more comfortable with, I'll humble myself kind of love than a sacrifice. I know there are a lot of people who are more comfortable with a sacrificial love, especially to a great extent, than they are to a humble kind of love. It says about Thomas in John chapter 11, verse 16, so Thomas said to his disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. So when Jesus says, I'm going to Jerusalem, they're going to put me to death. And Thomas, let's also go that we may die. And I truly believe he meant it. I believe he would have died with Jesus. But he didn't pick up a towel and a basin, did he, when everyone needed their feet washed? Everyone in that room knew the feet need washed. Who's going to do it? Thomas didn't pick up the towel. He's willing to die, willing to sacrifice, but not willing to humble himself. You know, there's a meme that goes around on Facebook sometimes. It's a husband to a wife. It says, when I said I'd do anything, I meant I'd take a bullet for you, not fold the laundry or wash the dishes. And I think that's true in a lot of cases. I know, what just happened in Florida. That teacher sacrificed his life for students, got in the way, took bullets for those students. I know a lot of people who would do that same thing. I truly believe I would do that same thing. But you know what? I have a harder time humbling myself and showing that kind of love. I'd sacrifice my life, and part of it, I just have to tell you, you go out like that, you go out like a hero. You go out a hero. No one's called a hero for washing the dishes. No one's called a hero for, if I wait, I know my wife will fold those clothes. She'll do that. It's her dogs, why do I have to clean up after them? Yeah, no one gets called a hero for doing that. And I think for a lot of people, it's truly easier, the thought of sacrificing our life, than it is of humbling ourselves and showing love that way. Jesus showed there's no limit, whatever side it is. Whether it's going to the cross, all right. Whether it's getting down on my feet and washing my knees and washing your feet, I'll do that too. And that has to be us. Well, another excuse that, this one's interesting. No one says this, but I seem to sense this sometimes. It's the idea that my task supersedes whatever you need. Whatever that I might be able to do to help meet your need, I can't because what I'm doing is more important. My time is more important. Again, people don't say that, but boy, I sort of get it because they'll say, I'm doing this. And yeah, we can all be busy, that's true. But just in general, if we think, I'm above this, my task is more important, to take my time and do that and not meet the need of someone that God's put in our path to love. And once again, what do we see here? Well, Jesus had a little task coming up. It's called salvation. He was about to save the world. And he got down on his knees and washed feet. It tells us in 1 Corinthians 13, if I speak in tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. It doesn't matter what my there are other things I should be about. But if I'm not willing to love, again, the things I do aren't as important as who I am. And granted, there's limits. You can't say yes to everything, all that. But if I'm not willing to, if I don't have this humility to do what needs done, well, then I'm not the person I need to be to do the things I need to do. If I think my tasks are always more important than your needs, there's an issue with me. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I'm not being the person I need to be. I think Jesus knew that. I'm about to do the most important thing ever. But I also need to give an example, and I need to be myself, who I need to be. And that's someone that humbly loves. And then, of course, another one sometimes that comes up is, I've got my own need right now. I've got my own issues. I'm suffering right now. I can't think about meeting the needs of others. And once again, you can think of the extremes. You just get some call that, someone close to you has died. That's not, okay, could you wash the dishes? Yeah. But in general, we're all going through things at times. I don't know there's not something going on that I could always look to and say, no, I can't meet your need. I've got my own needs that aren't met yet. Oh, again, you think of Jesus. He knew the time had come. He wasn't going to sleep yet. I could see him saying, guys, I've shown a lot of love up to this point. I'm not going to bed ever again before I die. I guess he's never going to bed again because he probably didn't sleep after that. So I'm not sleeping again, guys. Couldn't I get a break here? He didn't say that. Jesus had real needs himself, but he met their needs. And so Again, 5 verses, and they answer every excuse I could think of, and sometimes every excuse I've thought of, to try not to show love in one way or the other. This is the love that Jesus showed. It's the love we're to show. There's a preacher in Phoenix that commented on this. He says, this love, it is love that does not demand its own rights, that gives up self-actualization to do the hard work of discovering what will bring the best out of the other, even if they're an unappreciative spouse or child or boss. It is love that trusts its needs will be met, so it's free to give up demanding the terms and furniture of what being taken care of should look like. Instead, this love looks through the gray haze, through the imperfect world, through the loss, through the broken dreams, through the injustice, through the shame, with a delightful, almost selfish realization that it is the only life worth living. The only life that will ever satisfy and make life worth living. It's that love. We shouldn't settle for anything less than the love that Jesus showed. If I say I love people and it's not this, I'm missing out. They're missing out. I'm missing out too. Well, that's all great stuff, but up to this point, it's still what Jesus did. Okay, how did he do it? He loved Judas when he knew Judas was going to betray him. He loved when he was facing the most difficult time a person has ever faced. All these excuses, Jesus loved. All right, how did he do it? Well, I skipped over verse 3 when we were going back through this. It says, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things back into his hands and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. Right there you see this biblical pattern of how action occurs, how growth occurs. We do things because we know things. Jesus rose from supper. He did something. He washed their feet. Rose from supper to wash their feet. How did he do it? Because he knew something. The Bible talks about this pattern of our mind, our heart, our will. I understand something, so I commit to it with my heart and I do it. I live it out. Jesus washed their feet because he knew things. Now, I wish it would say, because he knew God was in control and loved him. It'd just make this sermon series just fit together so well. But I think it does say that when you read it. When you read the good book like a good book, you don't wait for it just to spell out everything, and you look at it some. You examine it. You reflect on it. What do we see here? Well, it says he knew that the Father had given all things into his hands. The NIV says, put all things under his power. Well, think about it. He's about to experience what from the outside, certainly from the disciples' point of view, looks like utter chaos, right? Here is this person who we thought was the Messiah, this person who walked on water, who raised the dead, and he gets arrested. He doesn't call down 10,000 angels as he could. He gets arrested. He gets put on trial, and then he's up on the cross. It looked like utter chaos, but Jesus knew everything was under his power. He was in control. Now, you and I aren't in control, but we're not Jesus. There is a sense that he's different from us. He knew that he and God, the Father, were in control this whole time. Whatever it looked like, God was still in control. And then he also says he knew that he had come from God and was going back to God. He had come from God, from being with God, from being in the presence of, and again, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, this Trinity we'll never understand, but this loving relationship with a love that is perfect. That's what Jesus had experienced completely and fully prior to this. He knows he's about to go back to that. He knows God loves him. So it doesn't come out and say it, but it says it just as clearly as if it did. He knew God was in control, and he knew God loved him. All right, well, how does that help then? Well, love is meeting the needs of others, and I think one of the main reasons we struggle is we worry my needs won't get met. If I go too far, if I show it to this person, if I do it at this time, my need for love won't get met. Well, if I trust that God's in control and he loves me, I can trust whatever need I have. Again, maybe it's not a need directly for love. I've got to feel the love right now. But whatever need I have, and sometimes I just don't want to take the time. Why? Well, because I've got this thing I need to do. I got this I need. So I don't have the time to show love to you. Well, if I trust God's in control and He loves me, I'll trust whatever needs to be done, if I do what He says to do, it will be. Where God guides, He provides. Well, if He guides me to love someone, He'll provide what I need. The only way I can trust that, though, is if I know He's in control and He loves me. He's able to and He wants to. That's how everything we've seen helps us in this situation. Well, I want that to be true, don't you? I want to be able to face a situation where I see the need that I'm called upon and the way that I'm called upon to love someone, and I want to know, all right, God, if I do that, this thing that I could easily be worried about myself, this need that I have, I trust it will be met. I want to be able to know that, to trust that. But like so many times, just what we saw with Abraham, I want to see it first. God, show me how my need will be met, then I'll love this person. And you remember what Paul said as we came to learn about control and love. You can't see it first. To experience and know God's love, what do you have to do? You have to trust it first. God, I have to trust you and see your control. I have to trust you and see your love. I can't see it first, and then I'll do what you say. Now, I've got to show that love. And when I do, then I'll experience God's control and love more and more. It's this cycle then. I've seen it, I've experienced it some. I'm called upon to love. All right, I'm going to trust, and then I'll experience it even more. Well, the last verses of this give some follow-up, verses 12 through 17. It says, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments, he returned to his place and said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Jesus says, this example that I've given, it's just that. And the principle that he's saying is to meet the need the other has. If a person truly had a need for washing their feet, great. That's what we need to do. Don't know that that's an issue today. In these foot washing services, they didn't really need their feet washed. They washed them right before they got there. But whatever need it is, whatever need a person has that I'm called upon to meet that need, I'm able to, or God guides me, I need to do it. I need to follow His example. He's the master, I'm the servant. If He did it, there's no excuse for me not to do it. And again, I'm missing out on this love if I don't do it. I'm experiencing a half-hearted love, not from God, just my own love in my life if I miss out. Well, what do I need to do then? I have some questions here. Is there a situation where I'm not showing love? Where I'm not meeting a need that a person has? And think of people, what they really need. And the problem here is sometimes we want to show it, but we don't really want to meet their need. And I know this can be true with parents. You know, I want to show my love to my daughter. Hey, let's watch a movie. Why? Because that's what I like to do. That's not what they want to do. Not the need they have. Well, then that's not really showing love. You know, if Jesus say, hey guys, I want to show you my love, and did something other than washing their feet, well, that wasn't the need they had. And so is there a person that I'm not meeting the need that they have? What need of mine am I afraid isn't being met or won't be met? Is that what's keeping me back? If I do this in this certain situation, well, it's going to jeopardize this for me, this need that I have, this time, what I want to do with my time, what it might do to humble myself like that, and my respect and my position, all of that. What am I afraid of? My need that won't be met. And then how can I look through this lenses of God's control and love? How will that impact things? I'm faced with this situation. Here's the need. Don't really want to do it. I'm afraid of this maybe. This might not happen. Afraid of just the fact I don't like it. How can I look through God's control and love? Like, all right, that's what's going to get me to do this. That's the how. That's the how I'm going to do this. You know, and I would say this, focus on this now. Focus on God's control and love now. It says that Jesus here, it says he knew that God, the Father, loved him. He knew God was in control. He knew these things. It wasn't like he didn't think of it before and just remembered it then. Ingrain this. I need to be ready when I face whatever situation because I am absolutely sure God's in control and He loves me. I've ingrained that. I think about it. I meditate on it. I praise Him for that. So I'm ready when I face whatever it is. And then also, do I have a relationship or relationships where people can show me love? The focus today is on us showing love. Do you know what? I need to have those. I need to be open enough with people that they can show me love, that whatever need I have. That's how God envisioned it. You know, Dennis talked about communion not meant to be celebrated alone. We aren't to be alone. Yeah, God wants us to be in a relationship where our needs also are met by other believers so they can show that love, so they can have the wonderful blessing themselves of showing true love, so I can have my needs met. And maybe that's one reason. I'm afraid my needs won't be met. Well, I don't let anyone. I'm not in a relationship that's deep enough to do that. Well, the last thing I like to ask sometimes is, what will it look like? When I get to this point, when I show this kind of love, what will it look like? And verse 17 goes a long way. It says, if you know these things, you will be blessed if you know them and can answer the questions correctly on a test. Is that what your translation says? Not exactly, right? If you know these things and can recite them by heart, if you know these things and you've heard them for years and years, none of that matters, does it? If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. If I do these things, I'm going to be blessed. And stop and think about it. Just your life in general. How would your life be impacted if your love went up a notch or two? You know, not just how much maybe, but the quality of your love. How would it impact your life? How would it impact your relationships with your spouse or your kids or your parents or coworkers or family or friends? And how would that impact your life? How would it impact a church? You know, so many churches want to grow. Well, to grow, you've got to get people's attention somehow, right? And there's different ways to do that. You can have the big building and all the programs and a great band. That gets people's attention. The early church didn't have that. You know, churches in China, Korea don't have that. They're growing. We can get people's attention if we show true love. Won't that make us stand out, especially in today's world? If we show this kind of love, people are going to notice. Now, we just show it to each other in this room. One, you got to do that, because if you don't, you have disunity, and no one wants that. But if we only show it to people in this room, they won't really see it. We've got to show love to people. They're going to say, wow, there's something different about you. And then as a bunch of churches did that, how would that impact the world? How would it impact our culture? What could have happened? This kid down in Florida, if someone had shown him love, true love, genuine love, what could happen to so many people? Not absolving a person of their guilt if they don't do it, but what things could we stop them from getting to that point of making that decision if we showed the love they need? That choice, other choices every day. And what would it do to my choices? If I truly was in the habit of loving like this, how would it impact the choices I make? If I could get this love stuff down, I wouldn't do a lot of the things I do, not do a lot of the things I don't do. This really is the key. Jesus says, you'll be known as my disciples by your love. All right, well, we're known as his disciples, and people know our love. What do they think of Jesus' disciples when they see my love? Oh, that's what a disciple of Jesus loves like. I'm not real impressed. I'll stay home on Sunday. But if we can show them what it really means, yeah, I want to check that out. So as always, we're faced with an invitation, with a decision. It starts with, if I've never made this decision to accept Christ personally, if I haven't believed, repented, and been baptized, I've got to do that. But if I have, okay, now I'm on to beyond the 101, the beginning, now living this life, becoming more and more like Christ, and this is a key way. What am I going to do? What are you going to take home with you today, and what are you going to do